A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I am Corn Poppleberry, and we are coming to you from our home in Jerusalem on what feels like a truly historic week. Usually, we are diving into an audio prompt sent over by our housemate Daniel, but today, Herman and I decided to take the reins ourselves. There is just too much happening right outside our door and across the region to talk about anything else. The production team and Daniel were talking about some of the headlines coming out of the Middle East over the last 48 hours, and we realized we needed to dedicate a full deep dive to what is happening under the surface with Iran. I am here with my brother, Herman Poppleberry. Herman, you have been buried in reports since yesterday morning.
But with Operation Roaring Lion and Operation Epic Fury currently unfolding, we are looking at a potential tectonic shift that hasn't been possible since 1979. There is this massive report from Israel Hayom that dropped on March 3rd, which was just yesterday, and it is really pulling back the curtain on something we usually only talk about in hushed tones or spy novels. We are talking about the actual, practical mechanics of regime change. It is the ultimate what-if scenario, but it is becoming less hypothetical by the hour. For decades, the West and Israel have viewed Iran through the single lens of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the export of terrorism.
Right. And that is the thing. Most people hear regime change and they think of a sudden coup or a massive invasion like Iraq in 2003. But the current chatter suggests something much more surgical and, frankly, much more complex. I think that is where we have to start. Most people don't realize that the enmity between Israel and Iran is a historical blink of an eye. It is only 47 years old. Before the revolution, we were strategic allies. We had trade, we had shared infrastructure, and we had a mutual understanding of the region. Herman, you were looking into the actual cultural depth of Iran earlier. It is staggering when you compare it to other global powers, isn't it?
It really is. Iran has 21 United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization World Heritage Sites. To put that in perspective for our listeners, that is more than the United Kingdom, which has 18. It is almost as many as the United States, which has 24, but the United States is an entire continent. Iran has this incredible density of history. You have Persepolis, the seat of the Achaemenid Empire. You have the ancient city of Isfahan, which people used to call half the world because it was so beautiful and cosmopolitan. But here is the kicker, and this is what we often miss in the West. The IRGC controls between 20 and 40% of the entire Iranian economy. They run the telecommunications, they handle the engineering contracts, and their massive conglomerate, Khatam al-Anbiya, alone handles billions in construction projects. If you just snap your fingers and try to make the IRGC vanish, you are not just removing a security apparatus, you are collapsing the entire supply chain of the country.
It is an economic octopus. I remember we touched on this back in episode 757 when we talked about the shadow state. But if the goal is regime change, and the US is meeting with these ethnic minority groups, are they trying to create a pincer movement? You have the Kurds in the north, the Baluchis in the southeast, and then you have the internal protests that have been rocking the country since January of this year. That is the part that fascinates me. We often talk about the Persian street versus the regime. We have seen the protests over the years, the woman, life, freedom movement, and the internal fractures that have been growing.
That is the strategy in a nutshell. It is about forced overextension. Think about it from the perspective of a commander in Tehran. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi was trying to play this pragmatist role in late 2025, but the hardliners saw the writing on the wall. They knew that the Iranian people are not naturally anti-Western or even anti-Israel. In fact, many covert surveys have shown that the Iranian public has some of the highest favorability ratings toward the West in the entire Middle East. They don't have the same historical grievances that some of our closer neighbors do. Economically, they are under a vice. And now you have reports of the US and Israel basically building a coalition of the periphery. If you can get the Kurdish regions and the Baluchi regions to move towards semi-autonomy or open revolt at the same time the urban centers are protesting, the IRGC cannot be everywhere at once.
They have the fourth largest oil reserves at 155 billion barrels, and the second largest natural gas reserves in the world at 34 trillion cubic meters. They have the resources, we have the tech to help them manage those resources sustainably. The blowback is legendary. In the Iranian context, if you are backing Baluchi groups like Jaish al-Adl, which have a history of pretty brutal attacks, are you just replacing one monster with a dozen smaller ones?
It was designed to bring Iranian oil from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, bypassing the Suez Canal. It is still there. It is still operational. In a post-revolutionary world, that pipeline becomes a literal bridge between our economies again. For listeners who might not know, Reza Pahlavi is the son of the last Shah of Iran and currently lives in the United States. In February of last year, 2025, there was this Munich Convergence Summit where a coalition of opposition groups basically tapped him to be the nominal leader of a transitional government. It changes everything. This is what I call the Central Asia pivot. Right now, Israel has very strong ties with Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan. These are secular majority Muslim states that provide a huge amount of our energy and are key security partners. But there is a giant gap between us and them, and that gap is Iran.
Pahlavi is an interesting figure because he brings that historical weight, but he also carries the baggage of his father's reign. And we have to talk about the historical memory here, Armin. Operation Ajax in 1953. So we are talking about a trade route that goes from Haifa and Ashdod through a friendly Iran straight into the Caucasus and Central Asia. That is a massive strategic upgrade. It essentially recreates a modern Silk Road where Israel is a primary hub.
Precisely. And it reduces the leverage that hostile actors have over us. Think about the Abraham Accords, which we discussed back in episode 928. That was the first step normalizing with the Sunni Arab world. But Iran is the big prize. If you have a friendly Iran, the entire Shia arc that the regime spent billions building, the one we analyzed in episode 766, it doesn't just collapse, it reverses. The protests in January showed that for a huge segment of the youth, the fear is gone. They are not looking at the US as an imperialist invader as much as a potential lever to get the boot off their necks. But you are right about the fragmentation. You have Pahlavi, but you also have the MEK, the Mujahideen Khalq, and their political umbrella, the NCRI. It would be the end of the long war. And for the United States, which is partner leading these strikes in Operation Epic Fury, it is the ultimate validation of the maximum pressure strategy. It shows that you cannot bribe a revolutionary regime into being a normal state. You have to support the people and remove the ideological barriers.
I wonder about the spillover effects on other global players. You mentioned China earlier when we were prepping. They signed that $400 billion cooperation agreement with the regime back in 2021. If the regime falls, what happens to China's influence in the region? If the central government in Tehran starts to wobble, does the IRGC just retreat into their economic fortresses and wait it out?
If a new, pro-Western, or even just a pragmatic nationalist government takes over in Tehran, they might look at those lopsided deals with China and say, wait a minute, why are we selling our oil at a massive discount to Beijing when we can sell it on the open market and buy better technology from the West and Israel? It is a huge blow to the China-Russia-Iran axis we have seen forming. We could see a scenario where the IRGC drops the religious pretenses and transitions into a pure military dictatorship, similar to what you see in some other parts of the world. They would claim they are the only ones who can prevent the country from being carved up by the Kurds and Baluchis. It is a powerful narrative. They play on the fear of disintegration. They tell the Iranian public, look, you might hate us, but without us, you are Syria. You are Iraq in 2004.
That is a very effective threat. It is the stability versus liberty trade-off. But here is where it gets really interesting for me. We have spent years talking about Iran's axis of resistance. They have spent decades building proxies in Lebanon with Hezbollah, in Yemen with the Houthis, and in Iraq with the Shia militias. They are the masters of unconventional warfare. Is it possible that the US and Israel are finally just doing to Iran what Iran has been doing to the rest of the region for 40 years? It is a mirror image.
Corn, that is exactly what it is. It is the operational fusion of the opposition. Just like the IRGC Quds Force trains Hezbollah to operate as a state within a state in Lebanon, the report suggests that CENTCOM and Israeli intelligence are helping these Iranian opposition networks build their own parallel structures. They are teaching them how to maintain secure communications, how to manage logistics under the radar, and how to coordinate civil disobedience with armed pressure. It is the axis of resistance playbook, just flipped on its head and pointed toward Tehran. And the IRGC is terrified of it because they know exactly how effective it is. They invented it.
So, if we are looking at this from a second-order effects perspective, what happens to the proxies if the IRGC is fighting for its life at home? If the money from Katamalambia starts getting diverted to pay for domestic security and keeping the lights on in Tehran, does Hezbollah just wither on the vine? We covered the fusion of the IRGC and Hezbollah in episode 757, but that fusion works both ways. If the heart starts failing, the limbs are going to feel it first.
But we should also be realistic about the challenges. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps isn't just a military, it is an economic conglomerate. They control 30 to 40% of the Iranian economy. Dismantling that without crashing the system will be a delicate operation. It is going to take a lot of international support and a very clear-eyed approach to reconstruction. It is not just about the government in Tehran, it is about dismantling the entire regional architecture that Iran has built. It is a total war just fought through 1,000 small cuts.
I want to push back a little on the timeline. We hear these rumors about the US being in touch with potential IRGC replacements for years. This is not an overnight process. Some people think you can just flip a switch, but this is more like gardening, right? You are planting seeds, you are weeding out the ineffective groups, you are waiting for the right season. It also changes our domestic politics. So much of the political divide in Israel is based on how we handle security threats. If the primary threat is gone, the political landscape here shifts too. It might lead to a more consensus-based domestic policy because we aren't constantly in emergency mode.
That is a very optimistic take, Korn, but I think you are right. It forces us to look at who we want to be as a nation when we aren't just surviving. And for the Iranian people, it is the same thing. They get to decide what a modern, prosperous Iran looks like. The goal is not necessarily to kill every IRGC member. That is impossible. The goal is to induce a mass defection at the critical moment. You want the colonel in charge of a tank battalion to look at the protesters and decide that his future is with the new transition government, not with the dying regime. Or the deserts of Yazd. They have these ancient wind catchers, these bad gears, that are a form of natural air conditioning from hundreds of years ago. It is brilliant engineering. I would love to see those in person.
That is a crucial point. It is the off-ramp. If the IRGC thinks they will all be executed or imprisoned after a regime change, they will fight to the last man. They have to believe there is a path to survival. It is the ultimate my weird prompt topic because it feels so far-fetched until you realize how close it actually is. On February 28th, just a few days ago, the Omani foreign minister, Badr bin Hamad al-Busaidi, said peace was within reach. The regime was backed into a corner. They chose to fight rather than give in, and now we are seeing the consequences of that choice. But the end result might be the peace they were trying to prevent.
It is a tragedy that it had to come to military strikes. But when you are dealing with a regime that views peace as deadly poison, sometimes you have to break the bottle to save the person inside. Operations, Roaring Lion and Epic Fury are the breaking of that bottle. The current strategy seems to be targeting the top-tier leadership while trying to preserve the rank and file. CENTCOM has been very specific that their focus is on dismantling the security apparatus, but they are leaving the door open for how far down that targeting goes. If they can flip the mid-levels, the top tier collapses.
I want to pivot to the internal dynamics of the Iranian population. We often hear this idea that the population is behind the IRGC because of nationalism. Even if they hate the regime, they love Iran, and they do not want to see it humiliated by foreigners. How much of that is still true in 2026? It is a vision of the future that is worth fighting for. And it is a vision that I think the United States administration and the Israeli government have been very clear about. This isn't just about destruction, it is about what you build afterward.
And that is why the Central Asia pivot is so key. It is the building part. It is the new trade routes, the new alliances, and the new energy map. It makes Israel a global player in a way that our size would normally not allow. They are starting to see the IRGC as an occupying force, not a national defender. When the IRGC spends billions on missiles for the Houthis while Iranians cannot afford meat or medicine, the nationalist argument falls apart. It really is. And for our listeners, I think the takeaway is to look past the immediate tactical reports. Yes, the strikes are significant, and the military reality is intense right now. But the goal, the why, behind all of this is the world we just described. A world where the Iranian and Israeli people can finally be the friends they were always meant to be.
I couldn't agree more. And hey, if you are listening to this and you have your own thoughts on what a post-war Iran looks like, or if you have some obscure piece of Iranian history we missed, we want to hear from you. We have been doing this for 915 episodes now, and it is the interaction with you all that keeps us going. Bashar al-Assad is still there because his security core did not break. What is the catalyst that actually breaks the core?
It genuinely helps other people find the show and join the conversation. If the leadership looks weak or divided, the mid-levels start looking for the exit. And third, the presence of a viable, credible alternative. That is why the US is working so hard on this opposition network. You have to give the IRGC something to move toward. If the choice is the current regime or total chaos, they will choose the regime. And if you want to get in touch, there is a contact form on the site. We read everything that comes in. Maybe your question will be the spark for a future episode.
This has been a heavy one, but an important one. We are living through history, and we are glad to have you all along for the ride. We will keep tracking the developments from here in Jerusalem. But if they fail, or if it turns into a decade-long civil war, the consequences are catastrophic. We are talking about a country of 85 million people with a sophisticated military and a nuclear program that is on the verge of breakout. Until next time, take care.
The nuclear piece is the ultimate wild card. If the IRGC feels the walls closing in, do they make a dash for a nuclear weapon as a final insurance policy? Or does a crumbling regime lose control of its nuclear materials? That is what keeps the planners at the Pentagon up at night. It is why the regime change strategy has to be so surgical. You cannot just kick the door down. You have to dissolve the hinges from the inside.
So, as we look at the next few months, what are the indicators our listeners should be watching for? We see the headlines about meetings with Kurds and Baluchis. What are the second-order signals that this is actually gaining traction?
Watch the IRGC's internal communications and their public posture. Are they starting to prune their own ranks? If you see a series of high-level arrests or mysterious deaths among IRGC commanders, that is a sign of internal paranoia. It means they know there are moles. Second, watch the borders. If the Kurdish and Baluchi regions start seeing more sophisticated weaponry or organized ambushes that look more like special operations than hit-and-run attacks, that tells you the training and supply lines are active. And third, watch the currency. The Iranian rial is a direct barometer of the regime's perceived stability. If it hits another freefall, it means the merchant class, the Bazari, have given up on the regime's survival.
It is a lot to process. It is a grim picture in many ways, but it is also a moment of incredible potential for the Iranian people. They have shown such bravery over the last 2 years. It is easy for us to sit here and talk about the mechanics of regime change like it is a game of Risk. But for the people on the streets of Tehran or Zahedan, this is their life. They are the ones taking the bullets.
We are talking about the hardware and the software of statecraft, but the heart of it is the human will. The US and Israel can provide the tools and the training, but they cannot provide the courage. The Iranian people have already shown they have that in spades. The question is whether the international community can finally get the mechanics right this time. Can we support a transition without destroying the country in the process?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question, and it is one we are going to be tracking very closely. If you want to dive deeper into some of the historical context we mentioned, I highly recommend checking out episode 894 on the IRGC's fight for survival after the death of Khamenei. It really sets the stage for the internal power struggle we are seeing play out right now.
And episode 766 on the Axis of Resistance's unified strategy. It helps you understand exactly what the US and Israel are trying to dismantle. It is a massive architecture, and you cannot understand the current regime change efforts without seeing the scale of what they are up against.
Well, this has been a heavy one, but a necessary one. We want to thank you all for tuning in to this deep dive. We picked this topic today because the news coming out of the Middle East right now is just too significant to ignore. It is one of those moments where the headlines only tell 10% of the story.
Definitely. And hey, if you are finding these deep dives valuable, we would really appreciate it if you could take a second to leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps the show reach more people who are looking for this kind of analysis. We are not just here to talk about the what, we want to get into the why and the how.
You can find our entire archive, all 900 plus episodes, at myweirdprompts.com. There is a search bar there, so you can look up any of the topics or past episodes we mentioned today. We are also on Spotify, so make sure you are following us there to get the latest episodes as soon as they drop.
We will be back later this week with more. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep an eye on those headlines. There is always more happening under the surface than meets the eye.
Thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts. We will catch you in the next one.
See ya!
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts.